Hi there, this is Dennis Velco with OutBüro. Thank you so much for joining us for yet another episode with LGBT professionals, entrepreneurs, and community leaders from around the world. Today, our guest happens to fit several of those categories. He is both a community leader, an entrepreneur, and a professional. I guess you tick all the marks. And his name is Ray Barron-Woolford, and he is hailing from London, England. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ray.
Thank you, and I'm really honoured and delighted to be part of your network this evening.
So, Ray, you have such a wide and deep background. And so I know we're going to be doing 2 episodes, folks. So if you make sure that you subscribe down below so that you're informed of our next episodes. I actually have about 10 interviews right now that I'm working on in a systematic approach to getting them released. But make sure that you are subscribed right down below and click that bell to be notified when new episodes come up, so that you can also be notified when our next conversation with Ray comes up, which is going to be a very interesting topic. I think you guys are all going to enjoy it. But for now, Ray, I'd love for you to give us a little bit of introduction of yourself and give us some of the background as to some of the projects, because you have been very deeply ingrained within the LGBT rights and movements.
Yeah, I mean, I really sort of started life, sort of in the 70s and 80s, sort of making my name in London through nightclubs. I was a gay, homeless young man, confused about my sexuality. I didn't really relate to the stereotypical gay people you saw in the media. And then, of course, as a teenager, we were hit by AIDS, which was extremely scary because so many people around us were just dying and getting sick. And I got really involved in the activist movement through realizing that so many of my gay friends were being thrown onto the street. And I got into the housing movement by actually housing gay people who, through no fault of their own, became AIDS victims. Quite often they were thrown out not just by the family, but sometimes by their own lover. And that got me really into housing and housing gay people and the political movement of equality and equal rights. And from that, I established the first property business estate agency in the UK, which specialised in housing gay people because it didn't exist. And that led me to probably 30 years of working in the housing sector. I became one of the first openly gay councillors to run for political office in the UK. I was elected to political office in Brixton in southeast London. I was shot by the far right. I'm one of the few British politicians to have been attempted to be killed because of my sexuality and the fact of my profile. I lost a partner, so that really sort of made the whole story very human to me and a lot of friends through AIDS. And then I got into nightclubs. I sort of got involved with the roller disco craze, running nightclubs to find ways of getting through life. And all sorts of sort of extraordinary things sort of happened to me. And I found that the gay scene was very awesome back in the 70s and 80s. It was everybody was involved. You'd go to a bar and there'd be trans people, there'd be drag queens, there'd be bikers and mustachios and clones. And it was really very inclusive. And I think one of the tragedies of the gay scene today is it's not as inclusive as it was. We've become so many about letters and so many different groups that we've forgotten about our solidarity to a certain extent. And so my politics and my sexuality now has become more broad. It's become about civil rights, it's become about social justice, it's become about campaigning against poverty and opportunities for everybody, because a lot of the disenfranchisement that gay people have are the same things that are faced by people in the Black Lives Matter movement, for example. And so I see myself as a gay man, and I experienced homophobia, and I've experienced struggle with my mental health and my sexuality. But that's also defined who I am and given me the power to make a difference. And that is what I do through my writing.
Okay, you have just given us, as I said, folks, he has done a lot, right? So you have just said in a concise manner, a whole lot of stuff. that I'd like to back up and kind of unpack a little bit for folks so that they kind of understand what you experienced and what you did and accomplished. Because although that was a very comprehensive statement, I don't think it got to the depth of what I'd like folks to understand. So, kind of starting off is one of your last statements is kind of some of the differences in the 70s, 80s compared to now. And I think for me, having kind of come out in Germany actually in 86 and 87, because I graduated from American high school in 1986, joined the Army, took a position, specifically a job that I knew I would be stationed in Europe to get the heck out of the US and away from my right-wing evangelical family, and especially my father and so forth, that I had that experience of coming out in the mid to late 80s, but in Europe, in Germany, and kind of, there's was just so different world, as you put it. One, we didn't have the phones and the scruffs and the grinders and the everything else. So one of the things that I personally find that's different is I'm a very social person. I love to go out. I love to meet people for coffee and sit for hours and chat over a coffee, or go, and meet for, a couple of drinks and sit and chat and people watch. I'm a people watcher.
Yeah, me too.
And it just seems like so much of our community, and back in the day, one of the ways in which we had as a community in which to feel that sense of connection, get that sense of connection, and also communicate was the bars. Going out, because that's where you would learn about the local news. That's where you would get, your information. And that's where, if you were if you were not completely out, which, for most people back then, that wasn't really quite an option as it is today. It was where you could be yourself as well and kind of unpack and let go. So,
But one of the strangest things about that, which I found as sort of a young boy, is like being gay, and there was nothing around me to tell me what was wrong with me. I was a gay boy that liked men, but there was nothing that I could relate to. And I remember that my parents had like these catalogs. I don't know if you have them in America, where you could buy clothes from a catalog, a bit like you have Amazon, you can screen on your internet these days. But back in the day, you'd have a catalog, and I'd go to the men's underwear section, because that's where I'd see men wearing, nice pants and scanty t-shirts. And that was the closest I could get to, my Playgirl type of fantasies as a gay man.
Ray, let me just confirm that I did the same thing. Mine was the Sears catalog. And it was, looking at the men in the underwear. And, this was also back in the day when the TV was actually a piece of furniture, right? It was, this was, mid 80s, early 80s. And there was I can't believe I'm telling you this, telling everyone this, I believe it was Mrs. Doubtfire, the movie. They had a scene where they went to a male review club. So as a female, I believe it was Mrs. Doubtfire. I'll have to now look it up. But then there was this scene where this, male was, dancing, stripping, only of course got down to his very tiny Speedos. Well, we'll just say when the family would go to sleep, sometimes I would be up at 1 o'clock in the morning watching that, and I had it queued up to 10 minutes before.
Yeah.
And so that I could fast forward, do my business, put it all away, and hope that the family, no one, my dad or his wife or my sisters or something, didn't get up to get a glass of water. It was,
Correct. But a lot of people forget as well that, remember that gay bars didn't have the advertising and the persona. If you were just coming out as I was, the way you discovered gay bars were quite often through the Sunday newspapers, who would write some expose of seedy gay men in the woods or wandering the streets. And I remember when I first came to London, and I went to the Coal Home, which is one of the most famous, gay bars in London. It sadly doesn't exist anymore, but it was like hugely important to gay culture around the world for what it does. But it was like a gay leather bar. And I remember I'd come every weekend from my house in the suburbs to London, and I'd stand at the bus stop across the road because I was too shy and too scared to go in a bar because there was all these gay guys in leather and big moustaches and chains and hankies and all the gear. And it took me about 6 months before I had the bravery. And the only reason I had the bravery was because one particular day I heard two gay guys in leather talking about fashion. And I thought, they were clearly not hard, because the leather had all these fearsome connotations with it, dominance and violence to a certain extent through the Easy Rider type of movies. And that was the moment that I actually went in. But if it wasn't for all these exposés about how gay people would be, going to these dark clubs or going to these woodlands or trolling these streets, I would never have gone. So in a bizarre way, us being victims was the way that many of us discovered how to become, fully fledged members of the queer community.
Right. Well, I totally can relate. My first gay club ever was a bar called Construction 5 in Frankfurt, Germany. And when I was in the when I first arrived at my unit in the U.S. Army in Aschaffenburg, Germany, which is about 45 minutes south of Frankfurt proper, I did what's called fire direction, telling missiles where to go. So I was between fire command, command and pushing the button. And so we took weather data and everything else, terrain and so forth, and did it all, computations to put the missile from this point to that point. Well, you had to live with you had to be, if you were in the barracks, being a single person, not married off base, you lived in the same rooms with the people that you worked with. So you literally were 24 hours a day with these people. And the person that I had, which is, I could do a whole episode just me talking about this fella named David McKinney. He was an African-American person. He was a lot like the person on MASH, the TV show MASH. I forget his name. Was it Klinger? Who constantly was like trying to get out of the military wearing a dress and so forth. Well, this guy would wear diamond-studded cocktail rings. Now, I don't know if they were real or costume jewelry or not, but this guy would wear like cocktail rings in his military uniforms. And it was so funny because whenever I first arrived, he, of course, because we were in not only the same unit, but the same job, therefore we lived together. Within the first couple of days, we walked over to the small kind of food store right on our what's called our concern, our small compound. And each city would have multiple compounds. So this one compound had a small, food and beverage shop and, snack shop. And I sat and I had a burger and fries. And then about a week or so later, we started talking. Of course, he was flamboyant. I mean, crazy flamboyant. And so he just started probing. And then one day he goes, I know you're gay because I saw the way you eat your fries. You eat your fries like you want to, I'm like, I mean, yes, eventually he kind of pushed me to come out, and, he was kind of like became my mother. And he was like, we're going to Frankfurt this weekend. And he dressed me. I mean, he put me in, I had basic clothes. He's like, no, you're not wearing that. Here, put this on. Here, put this on. And, had it not been for him, I would have had a much more difficult time because it was, you had to get on a train, go 45 minutes by train and find it and so forth. And I was totally clueless. So I kind of there were negativity about having someone so flamboyant live in your same room in 1986 and 1987 in the U.S. Army. But there are also some benefits. And so I'll have a whole episode eventually of me just chatting about that. So I don't want to take away from you, but part of that is I can relate because there were other bars in and around the area called the Kunstabelwache, which was the main street in the area. And there were other bars, and I too would kind of sit outside because there was a leather bar, there was, all kinds of different things, and I would more or less kind of assess each one as best as possible because it was new, and I was only 18 years old.
Yeah.
So how old were you when you first went to that first bar?
I ran away when I was 17, but one of the strangest things I found about the whole thing was that I quite often ended up sharing rooms with gay men who didn't know. We both pretended we were straight because we were working in bars and restaurants and what have you, straight places. And so quite often there was one particular occasion where I became homeless, where I was sharing a flat with a guy called Jamie. And it's where I lost my most treasured possession at the moment, which was an original signed copy of a Bette Midler program when Bette Midler was doing the London Palladium in London. And I met somebody in the street, and I took this guy back to my flat, and because my flatmate, who I didn't know was gay, but we were both pretending each other was straight, came home early and found me in bed with this guy. And I was so traumatized by being found out that I was in bed with a gay man that I literally said to my flatmate, I am going to get some milk. And I walked out of that flat and I never, ever walked back. And I spent 6 months on the street. I was so traumatized by being seen in a physical capacity with another male. And I think a lot of people would have experienced similar sort of things. It wasn't just the matter of being gay and the issue of going into a gay bar. It was then coming to terms with the physical contact and then actually coming out to people you knew. Although I was sort of open in a sort of weird way when I was 17, I didn't actually accept my sexuality till I was in my 30s. And I have friends now in their 50s who are only now, in 2020, coming to terms with their sexuality. It's extraordinary how we're such open as LGBT community, but actually the reality is internally we have so much turmoil coming to terms with who we are and how we express that and how we, even to our family and to our friends. It's one thing to be open and out to your friends, it's quite something else to your family. And I think a lot of people have issues with that, particularly if you have a family of faith, if you have a Jewish family, you have a Muslim family. There's lots of structural problems around it. And to a certain extent, being a runaway, I didn't have that family connection. So for me, to be queer was relatively easy because I didn't have anybody to be accountable to or anybody I was trying to impress other than myself. But there's a lot of people even now today still have struggles with those issues with the people around them, whether they're married in a heterosexual relationship, whether they have children, whether they have family, whether people of faith. So I still think that the issues that we had as young men back in the 80s, still to a certain extent, even though we think that we've won so much and we have such a broad agenda, we see so much of gay life on TV and on Netflix and everywhere else, the reality is for a lot of people, it's still a real struggle to come to terms with who you are and how you live the life that you want, because you're trying to live for other people, not necessarily yourself.
Right, absolutely. And it's like, and maybe, and I don't know why that is, except to kind of push on and kind of relate it to other issues. Of course, like racism, we think we've accomplished a lot, but then you really take a deep look and know there's still a lot of issues. There's still a lot of conscious and unconscious biases that happen. I also relate it to a lot of times, in the workplace, looking at, sexual harassment. Here in the United States, that's been illegal for 40 years, yet it still happens. So look at all the education. And so then to your point is, it's a very, very valid one, is look what all the progress we made, but look at, look at a group level and as an individual level, how people are, the struggles that they still have, whether that be as a group or even especially on the individual level. I mean, here in the United States, a huge portion of the individuals under 18 years old who are homeless are something like 3 times more likely to be LGBT.
That's the same in the UK.
Yes. So, and of course, the reason is because of the same issues that we've been talking about, that family dynamics, that family, not accepting them for who they are and pushing them out, whether that's physically that or that the parent or guardian told them, get the, heck out of my house, or whether similar to you, just walking out, them having the perception that the family would not accept them, and they leave on their own, trying to avoid that conflict. Both of those are valid points. And that's partly, I will say, for many reasons why I wanted to start these conversations and having them, out there, is that so, it hopefully people can listen, and having the professional, perspective is, having the different views, because one of the, and that there could hopefully make changes, because there's, for example, I just got made aware of a gay male person on YouTube who within just 12 months has nearly 30,000 subscribers and so forth. Good for him. But his content is not the kind of content that I would do. And because if I did his kind of content, it wouldn't fit with my audience, but there's a place for that. Just like there's another person on YouTube who does movies, and I actually did an interview with him, and he does film and so forth. And well, of course he has 70,000 followers already, because 80% of the time, the guys in his videos are walking around shirtless. If we were to be sitting around, well, I don't know, with you and I at our age, but
I don't know. The older men are still cute, I tell you.
Yeah, but
if I fancy my husband, and his
right,
like 40 plus.
Exactly. But if I said, oh well, I'm going to do a series of interviews, and one of the it's going to be targeting the male, because of course you got to be sensitive to the female. But hey, if I could get a lot of subscribers and get my message out, if I were to say, all right, I and my interviewees are always going to be shirtless and jock straps, right? I'll get a lot of subscribers, but then that would not be accepting to a huge portion of the rest of the audience. And so
the secret, though, I think the secret people forget is that, you look at Lady Gaga, you look at Madonna, they're not trying to be anybody else. They are who they are. And I think too many people try to emulate somebody else rather than be themselves. And I think it's a big thing that falls within our community. I sort of very late in stage discovered that on social media, I'd rather have 500 people that follow me on Twitter that engage and share and buy my books and engage with my activism than 200,000 that just peer through my, scroll down their Twitter page every day. Oh, yeah, this is what Ray's doing, like some peeping Tom. Than just have the figures. And I think too many people focus the wrong way round. A lot of advertising now is reversing from people that have got 200,000 or 300,000 followers to people that have 3,000 to 5,000 followers, because they find that those with a smaller following generally have a more proactive following base. And I find, for example, on my Twitter account that I probably have percentage-wise a greater engagement level than some of my friends that have 200,000 followers. And the
Mm.
same with LinkedIn. I mean, LinkedIn, I find, opens up the whole world. I mean, we've become friends through LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn is extraordinary because of the range of people you meet on a different level to you meet on Facebook or Twitter. And, you know, now on my follower, I deal with, you know, heads like you do, with leaders in the United Nations, members of governments around the world, leaders of great organizations, prime ministers, members of parliament around the world, all sorts of people I wouldn't have access through via any other social media. But thanks to LinkedIn, we together are having this conversation now. People are listening in, they're discovering my work, they're discovering your work. And it shows you that it's not about the numbers, it's the quality of the content. And I think we are now redefining through social media what we value, what we enjoy. Our time is precious, and therefore what we listen to and what we engage with needs to be a bit more substantial than, you know, a topless, you know, cute guy and, you know, what top you're going to wear on a Saturday night. I think we've gone beyond that, and I think people of all ages need something more substantial to actually sit and enjoy that, and to challenge them, to also remember and to engage with what's it like, you know, how did we get where we are, and even telling our stories about the 70s and 80s is like what people are having to do with now in Hungary and Belarus and Poland, and it makes it relevant in a way that people can understand. But they don't when they see the TV and it's all very lovely and we're marching through the streets, happy pride, you know, singing glad to be gay, when the reality is for a lot of people it's not that simple. And so our stories and our conversations have to be substantial, and they have to be accurate, and they have to be true, and they have to be a bit more substantial than superficial, so that people come back and want more information. They want to know more about what we do as adults and what we've learned, and to really sort of, you know, feed off us really to a certain extent as to examples in their own life, because we're all the same. We may be white males talking today, but the experiences we have are the same, whether you're Jew, you're black, you're Muslim, you're Christian, you're atheist. We all experience homophobia. We all experience hate. We all experience disadvantage and social injustice. And that's really what unites us all. So I think that, yes, we're on OutBüro and we're sort of a gay, you know, two gay men talking together, but our story resonates way beyond the gay community.
I absolutely agree. I do. And I really like your point to kind of reiterate is like, you know, even though getting back to all the advances that we've made, yet there's still so much work even in our, you know, societies of the US and the UK. There's also other countries where you know, like a hot post right now is what's going on in Poland within the LinkedIn group. And so there's lessons to be learned, and just like some of the issues that you have helped and dealt with in your past there in the UK, people in Poland and other areas of the world, they're just perhaps even thinking about dealing with those kinds of issues. So let's go back a little bit and talk about the housing side of the house, the housing side of the house. So that's the housing side of the conversation, and chat with us a little bit about what you did there.
Right. I mean, the housing was sort of quite extraordinary because when I was a gay man, I came to London and I sort of struggled to sort of get work, and like I said, I was living on the street. And then I found this squat that I was living in southeast London, a place called Brixton. And it was full of, you know, in those days, everybody's called transvestites. You know, we didn't have trans and all the agenda that we have now. And it was full of all sorts of different people. And we all lived in this house and we were all queer together. And then every Friday night, yobs would come around in cars and hurl petrol bombs and bricks literally through our windows every weekend.
Oh my God.
And, you know, write queer all over our building. And it was really aggressive and really, really violent. And we refused to allow it to happen. We were living in an area which was seen very much as a ghetto. It's sort of a black ghetto where we were living. There was this queer household in the middle of it. And what we would do every Saturday, they would come around Friday night and throw bricks. And every Saturday morning, all the guys would get on their best drag, and we had a sound blaster with the Supremes and Diana Ross. And we would march down Brixton High Street onto the tube in full drag, all dressed as the Supremes, playing out the Supreme song. And then when we got fed up with them writing queer all over our house, we changed the logo. So we wrote queer, we left the big word queer, we coloured it in pink, and then we added underneath it and proud, queer and proud. And so we turned the graffiti of hate into something positive and something of strength and power. And so from that, that's sort of really sort of where, being a homeless man, I got into the housing thing and got into the housing movement, and then living in this sort of powerful squat, which was, very, very active. But I was, still only 17, 18. And then when the AIDS came along, again, I was homeless, but I just thought we need to do something for gay people. And I was losing so many of my friends, and nobody could house anybody, because back in the 70s and 80s, to share with another gay man, it was actually very difficult. You couldn't get a tenancy agreement. There wasn't even gay holidays back in the 70s and 80s. And so it was quite a struggle, but the housing sort of haunted me, and I won Pink Paper, Gay Business of the Year. I was finalist London Businessman of the Year, London Chamber of Commerce, the only property professional that's ever won such a high prestigious award. And that really sort of opened doors in housing, changing policy. I worked as a government advisor for the government and for different political parties writing on housing policy. I worked on gay marriage in Tory government. And that sort of really got me into the policy agenda, realizing through housing and policy, it wasn't necessarily politics that made a difference, but housing. And then I moved to the area where I live in southeast London. And one day we were looking for somewhere to live, and I noticed that my local council was selling off really decent housing, which we needed for people in housing need, at auction, which means that they're sold at next to nothing. And so I got involved with this movement called People Before Profit, which is now a political movement. It's quite small in the UK. In the 2000s, 90s, it was much bigger, and it's now has power in Ireland, north and south. But it was built on a housing movement. And what we did was we went into all these buildings and we occupied them the night of the auction. And we filled them with families who were waiting on the council's own waiting list. And by occupying those houses, we changed the council's housing policy. So none of those houses could be sold because they were now all occupied. And the council couldn't really kick all these people out because it was their own homeless people that were in these housing. And so we suddenly realized through this housing movement that when you take some sort of direct action and work on policy, you can really make direct action. And then we progressed that. So we then said that there's too much land around London, which is sitting empty. We need to do something with it. So we occupied a piece of land, and we built an eco house on it in 24 hours and moved a homeless people into it. And the point was that a lot of land sits empty in order to stimulate the value of property. If you built all the houses that you could and had planning permission to build, it would bring prices down, which would make them houses less profitable to build. And so our argument was that if we can build a house as activists in 24 hours, the state can build houses in a few weeks with decent toilets and decent kitchens. And so we built it, and the council came around, the next day and bulldozed it because they were so embarrassed by it, by which time we'd got media coverage for it. And then we went to the actual town hall in Lewisham in southeast London, and we built an eco house literally on the lawn in front of our town hall, our state control centre, and we occupied it for 3 weeks until we changed housing policy. So really that sort of got me into, from the age where I've been sort of, campaigning for, gay equality in housing and housing law and against homophobia. I then got into housing, which of course, as we just said earlier on, that a quarter of all gay people around the world make up the housing problem. So, you know, whether it's America or it's the UK, whether it's France or even Greece at the moment, you find that a quarter of the homeless population are generally LGBT, even in 2020. And so that sort of really sort of progressed things. So sort of the housing thing went from the gay to the housing. And then I got involved, obviously, with food poverty and the issues around access to food, access to housing for everybody. And that really sort of took me on to other levels where I ran for political office. And I wasn't expected to win. When I stood for public office, it was quite an extraordinary story. I was on a bus and I overheard two people talking about a by-election. This is an election when a councillor has died or somebody stood down and they're having a temporary election to fill that vacancy. And so they were talking about this seat that was the Labour seat at the time in London, but they didn't have to do any work because it'd been Labour for 100 years and it wasn't going to change. And I was so incensed that they'd taken people's votes for granted that I went to this area and I got selected as the candidate for this by-election in a really die-hard safe in Brixton. And this is Brixton during the Brixton riots, before the Brixton riots. And I was knocking on doors and everybody said to me, you can't win here. It's been, you know, Labour for 100 years. You can't win, you can't win. And I knocked day and night on every door. And then I came across a young couple, an elderly black Windrush couple from Jamaica. And they were living in a tiny flat where the water had been leaking for years and it caused stalagmites on their ceilings. And they were sleeping on the kitchen table. So they had a little ladder. They lifted up the mattress, put it on the kitchen table, and that's how they've been sleeping for 4 years.
Wow.
And so I was so shocked by it. I said, look, I'm going to do something about that. So I rung up the radio and the TV, and within 24 hours, the TV were doing live broadcasts about how people were living in slum conditions in London. And they were rehoused within 48 hours. And even to this day, they call me Moses in Brixton, because of getting them out. It got me elected. I won a famous by-election, which led to me, because I was a gay politician, I was out at the time. I was one of the few publicly known gay politicians in Britain. I was targeted by a group called Combat 18, which is far-right extreme group, which wanted to have me killed. And I got involved in other things. At the time, we had these things called beef and butter mountains in Europe. We had this crazy enough where we were producing more food than we could actually get rid of. So I had an area which was very poor, and Europe had these warehouses full of meat and butter and sugar. And so the first day I was elected, I wrote to the minister in the EU, in the common market, and said, hey, why have you got all this food in warehouses when I've got people starving in Brixton in southeast London? And they said, well, how many people? I got a letter back 2 weeks later, and they said, how many people do you have? And I said, oh, about 17,500 people. So they said, can you take food if we send it to you? I said, yes. And 2 weeks later, 17.5 tons of meat, butter and sugar came from Europe to my little ward that I represented in Brixton.
Wow.
And that was when all hell broke loose. There was a House of Commons debate. What was Ray Woolford doing with all this beef from the common market? Was he not bribing his votes, winning his votes by giving everybody all this food? And there was an independent inquiry by the Fisheries Farming Department at the time, who said, no, Ray was an exceptional councillor who had gone to extreme measures to do what was right for the people he served. And out of that, because of the profile, it led to me, my profile going through the roof, which led to me one day at 12:20, my flat became so dangerous. I was living in a tower block at the time, but my neighbour, I had an elderly neighbour that was in her 90s, and she was more scared than me. And they would break into my flat, they would pee through my letterbox, they would write Nazi slogans all over my flat walls after they'd let themselves in with shit, literally. And it became so dangerous, the council put me into protective custody. I had to move. And on the day they were moving me to another flat, a car followed me up. This is like 12:20, midday. And a car had obviously been tipped off about me going to the housing office to get a key. I was a social council tenant at that time. And a car pulled up, two guys got out with guns and said, "Are you Ray Woolford?" And I said, "Yes." And they said, "Then you're a queer dead FFF," and started shooting me. And it was so surreal because at the time I had a huge phone. We didn't have little phones, and I had a big alarm to ring the police, alarm button to get police, because I was on police protection at this point. And I managed to switch the alarm on and get police, and the police followed me, and they were chasing me and shooting me down the road. And people at each side of the road were watching because it was so surreal. They thought they were filming a detective series or something. It was just like, it wasn't real. And then as I heard the police car coming towards me, because it wasn't too far away, I turned around and a bullet just hit my chin, just grazed my chin. So I got that close to being killed. And we managed to hunt these people down. They were actually caught. This is how crazy the legal system was in Britain at that time. It was so dangerous for me, I couldn't run for political office, so I lost my seat. I couldn't run again for political office from the seat that I loved. And the guy who shot me pleaded guilty. And because there was no crime, shooting gay people was quite acceptable in British law in those times, he got 18 months for assault instead of attempted murder, because you couldn't kill a gay person in the 1980s and 1990s. So wow. It was quite an extraordinary sort of experience. I managed to change things through policy and do some strange things. We didn't have social media like we have it now. But of course, that really sort of showed me that you have to stand for what you believe in and do what you believe is right, even when there's risk. And, I'm proud of what I did. I'm proud of what I've achieved. I've done it against the odds. I'm not a man with exams. I'm not, articulate. I'm dyslexic. I come from a single mom. I came through the childcare system. And I just think that, there's so many people out there that think there's no opportunities for me. And it's like, you've got to try and live the life that you want as an individual and be true to yourself, even though it's really tough sometimes and really hard and very lonely, and it can undermine your mental health. But I think the one thing I've done so many amazing things, and people say, you can't do this, you can't do that. And in the next part of the interview we're talking about is my work with civil rights and some of the stuff I've done there, which has been quite extraordinary. But the thing that I get across to everybody is that I've always lived an extraordinary life. I've had an amazing life. And I've always been humbled because the people that have always helped me in my life have been the people that have always been the sickest, the poorest, the people most disenfranchised. They have been all. So when I made it successful in business, when I became a successful businessman, and when I was, running nightclubs and working with Christopher Reeve, Superman, and all these amazing people, and I had a #1 album, and I had, dance groups and, top 10 chart hits with the groups I was managing and running successful clubs. I never forgot the people that helped me at the bottom. And today, now, fortunate for the grace of God go I have a husband I adore, I have a home I love, I have friends that I adore. And out of the blue, after 57 years, I'm now in contact with my mother, who I'd not seen for 57 years.
Wow.
And so some strange things happen in life. And I think the whole thing about my life has always been about being true, however tough it's been. It's been terribly tough. I've had terrible times. My last partner died. He was married. His wife tried to get me out of the house. I was banned from his hospital bedside because as a gay man, I had no rights to be at his bedside, even though we've been living together for 5 years. And so now when I married my present husband in a civil partnership, I didn't do it because I wanted to be part of the system. I did it because I wanted to protect him. And I remembered the struggles and the trials and tribulations I had in order to get that right to protect my husband in love and through a civil partnership. So, I hope that helps other people that are listening in.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And, there is so much. I mean, we haven't even began to tickle several of the things that you have done, just kind of briefly glazed over. And so, at any point that, you'd like to maybe delve into those other areas, would love to have you share your stories with that. But I know you have another appointment to get to here shortly, so wanted to kind of wrap things up here and say, make sure folks, we've chatted about a lot. I'm going to have show notes down in the bottom with links to some of the content for Ray. So please make sure that you check those out. Also connect with him on outbureau.com and begin to, so not only create your profile on outbureau.com, but also reach out to Ray and connect. Where we're striving to bring you the ability to connect, thrive, and engage beyond any other social media platform, being a LGBT professional and entrepreneurial focused. So Ray, we have chatted about a lot. I hope that people will see kind of the depth and breadth that you have. So if we are going to be doing another episode with Ray, so please be sure to right up here, link up to that here in just a moment. If it doesn't come automatically up here in your next episode. If you are listening to this on one of the audio apps, make sure you do. Don't know if this will be out immediately after, but be sure to look up Ray on our forthcoming episodes. Again, you can listen to this if you don't have time to see all of the. I love communicating. I love sharing and chatting in person, which is why I love to do these videos, because you're able to see facial expressions and get a sense of the person. However, if you are on the go or wanting to listen to this to and from your commute to work, or while you are perhaps doing some cardio at the gym, you can also listen to this on 14 different audio applications, including the popular Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and so many others. We appreciate you tuning in. And Ray, I thank you so much for your time in this episode and look forward to our conversation coming up in the next.
Great. Thank you. It's been a delight as always.
All righty. Well, thank you. This is Dennis Velco with OutBüro. Join us on outbureau.com. That is OUTBURO.com. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.